Snow came sideways that night, not falling so much as hunting. It slid low across the plain, sharp as broken glass, piling itself against Ethan Cole's cabin until the walls groaned like an old man waking from a bad dream. Inside, the fire had burned down to a nervous glow. Ethan sat with his elbows on his knees, boots steaming gently, listening to the wind speak in a language he had learned the hard way, through years of loss, through winters that took more than they gave back. He had just lifted his tin cup when the knock came. Not loud, not demanding. A sound made by someone who feared the door might never open. Ethan froze, and quiet that followed. The wind rushed in to fill the space, howling like it knew the cost of being unanswered. He stood slowly, joints stiff, heart heavier than it had been moments before. When he opened the door, the night rushed him, white and merciless. And there she stood. She was wrapped in a thin shawl that had once been blue, now faded into something closer to memory than color. Snow clung to her dark hair, melting into her skin. Her hands trembled, but her eyes did not. They were steady, old, carrying the kind of calm that only comes after suffering has already done its worst. "May I sleep in your cabin, sir?" she said, her voice quiet, almost swallowed by the storm. "It's freezing outside." The words did not beg. They simply existed. Ethan looked at her, and something old and painful stirred inside him, an echo of another winter, another door he had opened too late. He hesitated, and in that pause lived 1,000 thoughts he would never speak. Earlier that evening, the woman, Ayanna Redwillow, had stood in the yellow light of the boarding house, snow melting at her feet, while the woman behind the counter told her there were no rooms. Ayanna had seen the keys hanging behind her and used, but she had nodded anyway. Pride, when tempered long enough, becomes quiet acceptance. At the church, the doors were locked, candles dark. She had pressed her forehead to the wood for a moment, breathing in the smell of old prayers, then turned away before anyone inside could pretend not to hear her. On the street, Mrs. Hargreave had clutched her shawl tighter and whispered just loud enough, "Trouble follows her kind." Others pretended to study the snow, or the sky, or nothing at all. Even Deputy Wilkes had looked at Ayanna with an apologetic shrug, as if kindness were a law he no longer had the authority to enforce. By the time she reached Ethan Cole's cabin at the edge of town, her feet were numb, one heel bleeding where the leather had split. She chose his door not because she thought him gentle, but because men like him understood silence, and silence, she had learned, was safer than pity. Now, standing before him, she waited. Ethan noticed the blood first, then the way she held herself, upright, even shaking. He thought of his wife, of the night the doctor never came, of the cold that had filled the house afterward and never truly left. The town already watched him like a curiosity. Letting her in would turn whispers into certainty. The wind pushed hard against her back, urging her forward or away. It did not care which. Ethan stepped aside. No words, just space. Ayanna hesitated only a heartbeat, then crossed the threshold like someone stepping back into the world after a long absence. Warmth wrapped around her slowly, almost suspiciously. Ethan closed the door, shutting out the storm, though it lingered in both of them. Inside, the cabin smelled of wood smoke and stew. Ethan set another bowl on the table without asking if she was hungry. He pulled a chair closer to the fire and stepped back, as if afraid even generosity might bruise her. Ayanna sat, holding her hands toward the flame, breathing carefully. She did not rush. Survival had taught her that warmth, like trust, must be taken slowly or it burns. They spoke little. The fire spoke for them. The wind rattled the walls like an accusation. Ethan laid out a blanket near the hearth, then quietly took the floor himself. Ayanna noticed. She always noticed. Later, when the night deepened and the storm softened into a low, endless sigh, she hummed. It was not a song meant for others, just a thread of sound passed down through women who had learned how to endure. Ethan lay awake listening, something loosening in his chest that had been tight for years. Morning came gray and cruel. Snow buried the steps. By noon, Deputy Wilkes stood at the door, hat in hand, eyes flicking past Ethan into the cabin. "Town's talking," he said. "Best she moves on by nightfall." The storm was building again. Ethan could hear it waiting. She stays, he said, voice low, unyielding. That night, Ayana stood at the door, shawl pulled tight. I will go, she said softly. I won't bring trouble to your door. Ethan stepped into the storm with her. Snow tore at his face. He took off his coat and wrapped it around her shoulders. Hands steady despite the cold. Come back, he said. Not command. Not plea. Choice. She looked at him, really looked, and for the first time, allowed herself to believe the world had not finished with kindness. They walked back together. Years later, people would say the winter was the worst they could remember. But those who watched closely knew it was the season something warm survived. And if there is a lesson in this old memory, it is this. Sometimes dignity is not found in standing alone, but in daring to knock, and daring just once to open the door.